All right, we are now recording. Welcome to the February 17th edition of the Business of Agriculture Success Group. So happy to have everybody here. We got a bunch of different people that are going to contribute today. We're going to hear from Jordan about what the blizzard stuff is doing in her marketplace, because remember, she covers for Corteva, mostly row crop and specialty crop, I think, down in Texas. So she's going to tell us what the hell is now going to happen because of this weather that just went through there. We're going to hear from Kelly Garrett, who's an Iowa farmer that was on my podcast 2 weeks ago. He's going to take your questions about being in the carbon market. He's one of two farmers in the United States of America that so far have actually gotten paid to to sequester carbon. One was written up in the Washington Post. He was written up in the Wall Street Journal. So he's one of the two so far that have actually gotten paid. He's going to be telling us about that later and answer all of your questions. We're going to hear from Peter Schott, who's going to talk about blockchain as it relates to agriculture. And then he probably is going to demand that we send him all Bitcoins. I don't know, but he's going to explain that to us later from his which looks like he's not even at work today. He's just hanging out on his couch at his house in the Dakotas. And then, of course, we've got the lightning round, and we're going to hear from my co-host, Todd Thurman. We are not going to hear from Michelle Klieger today, which means you will not hear any of her condescending professor tone talking to you about economics. And you also then won't hear me hard timing her about how she enunciates foreign countries. Was just on a call, by the way, with someone yesterday that reminded me of Michelle, because this guy that I was on a conference call with, he said something about when he came back to the United States. I said, where were you working? He says, Praga. I said, what? And he says, Praga. And I said, Jesus, he's doing that thing just like Michelle, where they want to be so arrogant they won't just call the fucking country by its name. They want to call it by what the locals call it. And I said, Praga, I don't know what Praga is. He says, it's a small country in South America that borders Uruguay and Argentina. I said, oh, Paraguay. I know where Paraguay is. I just didn't know where Praga was. So anyway, now you've heard my comments about that. We're going to have fun. We're going to talk about carbon today and environmental things as they impact the business of agriculture. These are obviously big forces that we see coming to our industry, affecting everything from the farmer to the people that are suppliers to the agricultural marketplace. I just finished the sort of encore episode to the podcast I did with Kelly Garrett. I just got off the Zoom call previous to coming to this, recording next week's episode of the Business of Ag podcast with a guy named Rob West. He is a energy analyst that's now basically full on gets paid by investor companies, investment groups to analyze carbon and carbon risk, because he has people that are sitting there with hundreds of millions of dollars to invest. And they say, are we going to get our ass handed to us based on how this environmentalism regulation is going to impact this industry? In other words, nobody wants to invest in Exxon right now. Nobody wants to invest in BP, Shell, whatever. Companies that look like they degrade the environment are very much out of favor. So the gentleman that I had on, the reason I had him on is he views agriculture and land use as the much better method to carbon sequestration and to environmental improvement. And of course, he doesn't see regulatory and Washington, D.C. Answers as the answer. He believes it's probably going to be more likely. He believes it's going to be more likely that it's going to have to happen through the private sector. The tough part about that is it's very nascent. It's not developed, as we pointed out. Almost nobody in ag, we all hear that there's going to be carbon credits, that we're going to get paid for these things. Joe Biden said before he was elected that he was going to set up a carbon bank where farm landowners could access this. It's all being talked about. It's not really happening that much yet. So that's what we're going to hear from Kelly. But what I heard today from my guy highlights. The world emits 50 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year. The world emits 50 billion tons, but it's projected to go up to 80 billion in like the next 10 to 20 years as developing countries actually get a grid and create, electricity, et cetera, et cetera. He says that every American emits 20 tons of carbon dioxide. He went, because he's kind of a little bit of a left-leaning economist, if you will, he went the direction of going to one of 30 charities that says they will plant trees with your donation to offset your carbon. One's called One Tree Planted, and one is called Eden. So he's one of these guys that said, I'll give a few $1,000s to this entity that plants trees, and it's allegedly verified, etc. So I said, is that what's coming to ag? Are we going to just get to where some charitable group, then a bunch of folks feel as though they need to offset their own personal carbon, and they say, I live in New York City, I'm going to just write a check to this entity, and it's for, $1,000, $2,000, and then it goes through that entity, and then money comes to us, and we do certain things. The answer has always been to plant trees. But the reality is we can plant trees, that's fine. We've got range ground and marginal land and all this sort of thing that we deal with in agriculture. God knows I've put CRP acres in, but what about actually doing the work of farm stuff? Can we still do that? And so that's where there's this big sort of disconnect. Well, we're going to do regenerative. Well, we're going to still, and that's where Kelly's going to come in and talk about what he does at his farm. But again, how much of a marketplace is there really for this is still the question. If it's all voluntary, would companies really do it? Would individuals really do it? Or is it going to be a government sanctioned where you have to do it through a government exchange? And that's where this thing is still, I think we're in the Wild West. There's no rules. It's not really established. It's kind of a screwed up thing. A few other little issues there are right now, carbon doesn't really have a marketplace. So we don't know what it's worth. Kelly's going to tell you what he sold his for at his Iowa operation. But this guy that I just saw, who's an economist who makes a buttload of money advising investors on their carbon, regulatory environment, says anywhere from $3 to $50 a ton. So the spread is just remarkable. And then he says that done right, we can sequester 5 tons per acre of carbon. And I said, well, what's the maximum? Well, it could be as much as 8. Well, we still don't really know. But the big thing that he had to say about agriculture, if this is right, and we're going to hear more from Kelly about this, is that we had historically been 4+% of carbon in our soils. But through all of our tillage, and if you read my book, you know that I say that all the tillage we do in agriculture, we're going to look back at that someday the way we look at using leaches as medical care. We overtill, soil compaction happens when we till, soil erosion happens when we till, the Dust Bowl happened because we overtilled, the exposure of our soils to the elements for 6 and 7 months of the year when it's worth $6,000 to $10,000 to $12,000 an acre seems asinine to me. So then you've also got the carbon thing. So maybe the carbon thing is actually what's going to push us into a more regenerative cover crop, no-till arrangement because soil erosion hasn't been enough to do it. Government, USDA, Natural Resource Conservation Service, T by 2000. Some people like Jim Smith are old enough to even know what that means. T by 2000 was tolerable by 2000, a policy in the 1980s to get us to a tolerable amount of soil erosion per acre. So I'm thinking that the carbon thing is really the one that's going to finally push us over the top as an entire industry about covering our soil with cover crops and reducing our tillage, especially when they talk about the release. And then that one that really struck me in our call here was that soil carbon is down to about 1%, whereas it's been as much as 4%. There is a benefit to having carbon in the soil. We're going to hear more from Kelly about that. And because you'd say, what is the big benefit? What do I care if there's carbon in my soil or not? Well, carbon is life, first off, but carbon, as Kelly found out, made it so that nitrogen uptake was more efficient and more able to happen in his corn crop. So we're going to be hearing from him about that. So that's kind of the big overview of this. Obviously, if Michelle was here, she'd give you some of the economic standpoint on this, but I see this as being big. I think we're going to continue to navigate this. When you've got large corporations that are talking about this, when you've got Wall Street analysts talking about this guy that I just had on, that I recorded with before coming to this, when he's making the amount of money he's making to talk to large institutional investment firms about what they can do to offset carbon or to invest in companies that are offsetting carbon. And he says agriculture is probably the most practical. It's the most economical. he believes that through changing agricultural practices and reforesting, which of course can happen on marginal property because we all have land that we've put in CRP or whatnot. He thinks that of that 50 billion, almost half of that, 20 to 25 billion of those tons of CO2 could be offset just through agricultural practices. So his point was, why do we have administrations like the one that's in office right now saying, oh, I think we really need more windmills. Oh, we really just need to give another couple of $1 billion to Solendra, the solar company that Obama gave money to. The more practical thing, frankly, is just to have the exchange and say, all right, give this money to agriculture to change their practices. So I see this as an infusion of cash that we're going to be getting. I do see, especially under an administration like this, if it's true that we're going to favor agriculture along with the industries like solar and wind, if that's true, then we're going to be getting some money out of this, which is good for everybody on this call because we all earn our money, derive it from agriculture. And so if the landowners are getting monies, it comes back to us. So this is where I see that going. And the tough part is figuring out the dollar amount because it's everywhere from $3 a ton to $40 a ton to $50 a ton. And nobody seems to have a real clue on that and what you can charge. So that's my thing. That's where I see this going. I'm the outlook guy. I remember I'm a political comedian. I read the newspaper, I watch what goes on, and I watch human interaction, and I predict where I see the puck going. They're going to still throw a lot of dollars at nonsense. They're going to throw dollars at windmills and solar panels and all that stuff. But they're going to throw money at agriculture as well. And we're going to hear from Andy in a little bit. He was on here and it looks like he left. Hopefully, Andy Ambriel had a meeting with a solar farm developer. And I was hoping he'd stay on here to tell us about that. So I see a lot of energy. I see a lot of energy development. I see a lot of carbon money, and I see a lot of regulatory environment coming to this that if we play it right, we in agriculture might use as a revenue source. So speaking of that, Todd has a point that is a little bit along the same lines. Environmental compliance in ag. Is it the carrot where they pay you to do something, or is the stick where they beat the shit out of us and say you have no choice but to do this? Waters of the United States, that was almost going to be a law 6 years ago, was the stick. We were going to get abused. All waters, I mean, from a mud puddle on up, were going to be federally governed, and it was going to really impact how we could do practices on our agricultural land. It got defeated. That's the stick. Biden claims, and his people claim, that a carbon bank is going to be the carrot where we'll be paid for these things. One such example is something that Todd knows about. Large-scale animal agriculture obviously produces a tremendous amount of methane, manure, smell, and then sometimes have some water problems. Todd is going to talk then about what he sees happening in terms of the regulatory environment meets profit incentive for producers and things like manure digesters. So this is one example that might end up being a sort of, I think, maybe a model for what happens on carbon. Todd.
So I'm working on a project with a company that is essentially an energy infrastructure company. And so it's a little bit different than any of these other projects that I've been involved with. But they approached me and said, okay, our experience is building, owning, and managing gas pipelines. And so what they're really interested in is solving one of the problems with anaerobic digesters. And that is that they are just in random places around the country. They're not necessarily, they're strategically placed according to, location, relative to feed costs and biosecurity and things of this nature, but they're not sided with the idea of providing energy through the existing infrastructure. And so one of the things that they're interested in doing is taking advantage of that by being able to tap into existing gas pipeline infrastructure and utilize this renewable energy. And so they have some strategies in mind that can make that a little more practical. One of the challenges is having to move that gas to the pipeline. Okay, so a lot of times you have a digester, you capture the gas, you clean it up, you get it acceptable to the pipeline standards, but then you have to truck it to the actual pipeline to put it into the system. So they have some interesting ideas around that I think are very compelling, and their model is very much trying to figure out how can they provide that expertise and infrastructure in terms of developing and managing the gas production, and provide some capital infusion to make that happen with producers, and also solve some of the logistical challenges. So it's a pretty interesting partnership, and I think we're going to start seeing more of these types of opportunities for producers. And really, they approached me about getting access to the right people and trying to understand, what some of the obstacles are from the producer's perspective. And so you're starting to see more and more of these people reach out to producers to try to figure out how they can partner with agriculture producers to get projects like this off the ground. And so I think we're going to be seeing more of that. One of the things I also wanted to mention that I kind of visited with them about is the imprecise nature of what we're talking about. Damian mentioned earlier this range of $3 to $50, and I think there's a perception in the public that these things are sort of sorted out. But I also think there's a huge opportunity for the industry, both the ag industry and the energy industry, to really understand better what's going on. And there's just a lot of stuff that we don't know. One perfect example is methane. Methane has been getting really beat up lately. That's one of the reasons we're looking at the digesters, because we're going to capture that methane and utilize it for fuel, reduce our CO2 emissions and our methane emissions. But some of the recent research that's come out has shown that methane might not be quite as dangerous as we thought it was. Yes, it is contributes more to the greenhouse effect because it's a more intense contributor there, but it doesn't last very long in the environment. So compared to CO2, it's kind of here and goes away. And so if you start looking at the broader impact, it's not 100% clear what that relationship between CO2 and methane looks like. So I just use that as an example to mention that there's still a lot we don't know here. And one of the things that's going to be happening is this process, this market that we're talking about is going to evolve, but at the same time, the science is evolving, and our understanding of the way these things work is going to become more precise over time. So it's really something to keep track of, and I think it's really a source of a lot of risk for producers as we start thinking about this, because what if we pursue an opportunity based on some science that turns out to not be as accurate as we thought it was, and maybe we put our money in a project that is not quite as valuable 10 years from now as we thought it would be. So that's just something I think we need to think about, and it's some of the feedback that these guys I've been working with have gotten from producers is seems like the rules change every day, and so how do we make an investment? How do we plan for the future when we don't really seem to know exactly what we're doing?
Yeah, so kind of picking up on what Todd, this is not new. I did a speaking engagement for the Vermont Dairy Conference. I've done it twice. So let's say the first time was 12 years ago. And so 10 to 12 years ago, I'm the speaker at the Vermont Dairy Conference, and one of the large operators up there, he's a 1,500 cow dairy, let's say, which is big in Vermont, not necessarily in California, but it's big in Vermont. And then he was saying he was going to put in one of these digesters, and it was, $1 to $2 million outlay of capital. And that it didn't really make a lot of sense, but there was the ability to sell the power, and then also the ability to get some sort of tax credits and then play this game. As long as the infrastructure can be done and you can amortize it, as we all know, putting $1 million to $3 million into something, if you can amortize it and then it works. But when it's under this administration, that's the tough part for our ag folks is, well, the rule right now is we can do this. But if that rule should change with the new administration 4 years from now, you can't run a $1 to $3 million capital expenditure over a 4-year horizon and make it make sense. You need at least 10, even with rapid depreciation, all these kinds of things. So it's interesting that this is something that we've seen before, but where I kind of wanted to tell you about this, and that's why Kelly's going to talk about it. I have been paying attention for a long time. I'm an observer. I've been observing since I was a kid. This carbon thing and the environmental intensity within ag is like I have never seen before. My investor buddies, I'm going to hang out with them this afternoon. Don't tell anybody we're going to go golf. Poorly, but I'm going to go golf. And he sold his company. He does not need to do anything, but he wants to do something. And he is looking at an agricultural play that has an environmental component to it. We're talking about the investor class now that wants to be in ag. And it's always been they would come in and buy land. Jim lives in my part of the world. I've always made the crack when I go to a farm auction, if they don't know who I am, I'm going to put a name tag on that says investor from Chicago, because every goddamn piece of land that gets bought for a fair amount of money, somebody will be, the farmers go to the coffee shop. Do you hear that ground sold for $10,000 an acre? Well, who'd pay $10,000 an acre? It's only worth $8,600 an acre. Well, I heard it was an investor from Chicago. The truth is, we finally are at a point where investors from Chicago aren't just buying a chunk of ground. They really are wanting to be in this space. So I can't keep up, man. I just keep seeing it being increasingly, it's at a fever pitch right now. It's just that the marketplace is fairly unsophisticated. Kelly Garrett's going to talk to us here in a second, but if we all want to sell a bushel of corn, we know exactly what we can sell a bushel of corn for tomorrow, today, or even 1.5 years from now. On this whole carbon thing, or even methane credits, it's wide open right now, and there's still not any sort of real, shall we say, parameters. There's just a bunch of people wanting to be in it. Does that sound right, Todd?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think from the company side, the other thing you're looking at that I've been really following pretty closely is where these food companies are positioning themselves. And part of their response to this challenge on environmental impact has been to announce carbon neutrality goals. And so you see Smithfield Foods, saying that they're going to reduce their carbon footprint by 25% or something like that. Maple Leaf Foods up in Canada recently came out and they took some heat from people on social media. Those people may or may not have included me, but they took some heat about claiming carbon neutrality. But they did that through purchasing a bunch of offsets and investing in tree farms and stuff like that. So some people in the industry thought that was a little disingenuous to say we're carbon neutral, because it really wasn't carbon neutral in terms of operations. But you're starting to see more and more of that. Companies coming out claiming targets for carbon neutrality, regenerative agriculture, and it's like common theme we've been talking about. All of these things are fairly poorly defined, and the public and a lot of the legislators don't have any idea really what they're talking about or what a lot of this means. And so we've got to keep that in mind, that this whole thing is developing in the context of a lot of potential stakeholders, using the term they like to use, don't really know what a lot of this means, or what we're really saying when we make these claims.
Okay, I want to piggyback on that real quick. And again, I know I always want to bring it back to the people on this call. Only a couple of us farm, but we all obviously farm economics impact our economics if we serve the ag sector, right? We got Jill and we got Allie that are out there in the West, and we got Peter that's in the Dakotas. They are used to seeing people that are large stake landowners then selling mineral rights in the West, right? Where I own this ranch and I sold mineral rights for mining or oil drilling or what have you. In Pennsylvania, that was the big thing. And he got very politicized about allowing fracking. Fracking in parts of Pennsylvania would have allowed some of those mid-sized dairy farms to be profitable for a couple of years. And so that became the very political thing that Trump versus Biden and all that fracking thing. Much of the country doesn't have this mineral rights kind of thing. So I'm seeing this environmentalism as a new source of revenue, likening it to mineral rights. Like I said, there's people that had grazing land that had oil wells on their grazing land, and they didn't pump the oil. They just sold the mineral rights. A company subcontractor comes in and pumps out this stuff. I'm seeing this as what's going to probably be a revenue source for a bunch of other parts of agriculture. Uh, Jordan's dad has done really well on being able to pilfer money from some of these outfits. They wanted to put up a windmill, so they pay him to put up a test windmill and all that. That doesn't happen a lot of places. It's getting more so. I'm seeing it now on the carbon sequestration and the methane and digesters and things like that as being a new source of revenue in the farm sector. And that's kind of where I'm thinking that we got to really pay attention. This guy that was on my recording before I came here today said, and I can't verify this. He said, well, let's just say $35 a ton is what carbon is worth. Let's say I could give a farmer in Illinois $35 a ton. He said, there's a way I can run the math that it makes more sense to plant the corn and let it sequester the carbon and then not harvest it versus harvesting it and letting it become ethanol, because of the net gain on corn from Illinois gets grown, all the tillage, et cetera, harvested, turned into ethanol. Then it becomes all about carbon dioxide release versus growing it and then never even harvesting it. And it's just capturing it and putting it into the soil. Now we're talking about a completely different scenario. It says, I could build you a model that says it's more profitable to be a corn farmer and never actually harvest the corn or sell it for ethanol, just selling it as carbon, which is unfathomable. We've never thought about things like this in agriculture. But then he said, there are technologies that he is seeing, because he's an energy analyst, that kind of like genetically modified crops. What if we could plant something that is bred or genetically engineered to sequester double the amount of carbon into the soil? In other words, this corn plant's okay at making corn, but what it's really damn good at is just grabbing atmospheric carbon and putting it into the ground. Right now, you'd say, do I even care? I want to sell bushels of corn. But if you're getting paid by the amount of atmospheric carbon you're sticking into your soil, then you say, I'd take a 20% bump down on my corn yield as long as I'm getting that in carbon money. So these are things that I see are going to impact us moving forward. And to be honest, I don't even know of any ag companies that are working on a more rapidly carbon sequestering plant, but maybe that's our new horizon.
I think one of the things that we have to think about is a new model really developing, and the best example I can think of, I have a friend whose family owns one of the Big Ten ranches in Texas, so they're majority owners in one of the biggest ranches in Texas, and so if you think about the history of that ranch, it's been in the family 150 years, something like that. But if you think about the history of that ranch, he said it's been about new opportunities allowing us to keep producing cattle at a loss, and that's basically what their business has been. And so that you think about, okay, they used to make a lot of money in cattle, then those kind of opportunities dried up, those profit opportunities dried up, and they just weren't really making money in cattle. Wow, all of a sudden we find oil, and now all of a sudden the oil allows us to continue to raise cattle, even though we're really not making any money at it. And then he said the next big one for them was hunting, and so that hunting and being able to sell hunting leases and being able to manage that wildlife and some of those things really allowed them to keep the ranch together, even though they, again, weren't really making any money on the cattle. And so it allowed them to keep, doing their quote unquote core business, but it really wasn't their core business because that wasn't what was keeping them in business. And so he's saying these types of opportunities, carbon sequestration, energy production, wind, solar, whatever, water in some places, that those are going to be the opportunities that are going to allow them to continue to be operating. So I think that's really the way we need to start thinking about this, as these low margin opportunities. I mean, we've talked about opportunities to get out of that commodity cycle, but this is really a potential opportunity to allow us to continue doing what we're doing in a very efficient manner, continue to feed the world, but also make it profitable through these other ventures.
We've known for a long time, and obviously Ryan Moe just finally turned on his camera. He was probably eating, which is why he has camera off. But the point is, we've talked about this before, that for a long time, ag has never made sense at the production level in terms of profitability. That's why we have subsidized crop insurance. We have, loan deficiency payments and, all sorts of things that prop up farm price. Right now it's ARC and all these other programs that basically are farm subsidies. And that was about national defense and keeping abundance of food supply. What if, now, right now, it doesn't seem like it's going to be this way because there still is a real urgency to fund solar and wind and all these things that are more pet crony capitalism things that somebody within Washington, D.C. says pass legislation that makes it so we can do this. But what if we've always known that we subsidize agriculture just for national defense in terms of abundant food supply? What if there becomes a push? Let's continue to subsidize this because of their important role for carbon sequestration, something that we never would have thought about. But now it's like, oh, we need those acres out there growing in a certain way, and we'll subsidize the hell out of it because they're taking care of capturing carbon. So I see this happening. If we don't have any discussion and questions on that, I think we need to roll into my man Kelly in Iowa. But is there anybody want to interject before we go to Kelly? All right. So I know some of you listen to my podcast. Kelly Garrett is one of two farmers, according to the Washington Post article from a few weeks ago, who is actually being compensated for his carbon farming. Kelly was on my podcast. He was written up in a Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal pictures made it look like he was more of a truck driver because it showed him driving a truck and it showed him trucks in the background. But he's a farmer. He's got 6,600 acres. He's a yield set champion. He pushes yields on some of his corn acres. He's won some awards with that. And he has 400 cow-calf pairs in northwest central Iowa. So Kelly Garrett, welcome to the Business of Ag Success Group.
Hello, Damian. How are you today?
I'm all right. So you don't know all these people, but they're all right. And they like you because you're here to join us. So, all right. You were on the podcast, you get paid. Tell them real quickly, in case they didn't hear that, how your deal came about and what you got arranged through Nori and Shopify.
I am a partner in a website named extremeag.farm. It's 6 high yield farmers, yield contest winning farmers from across the nation. Locus Ag Solutions approached Extreme Ag looking for an early adopter. I'm not supposed to say guinea pig anymore. I'm supposed to say early adopter. And I volunteered to be that guy. Being in Western Iowa, being a no-till farmer was a natural fit for us. And I guess I feel like I have a lot of gamble in me. And this looked like a pretty safe bet. I didn't know if we'd ever get paid or anything, but all we had to do was invest in time, do some paperwork to do this. I want to tell you right up front, I apologize, but that Washington Post article is bullshit. That guy only sold very little credits, and it said in there that he got 110,000. I'm the guy that got the 110,000. That Washington Post article was very poorly researched. Saying that organic farming is better at sequestering, I would love to talk to that reporter.
Yeah, well, by the way, I think some of the people on this call probably agree that the Washington Post is a ridiculous publication you can't probably believe anyway. And after all, Jeffrey Bezos bought it. It went from being a liberal rag to now being the Jeffrey Bezos Post. So you're right. And it did say in that article that organic farming sequestered more carbon per acre. And it didn't verify why it would do that. And it was not a matter of tillage. It just talked about, user. So that was wrong done. But yes, you're one of the guys that got paid. So the way your deal came together, I think it's interesting because you got paid retroactively. It's not for what you're doing in crop year 2021. It's for crop year 2016. Explain that.
We are part of what Nori calls the P5 program. Locus Ag Solutions was our account manager. We validated our carbon credits, or we validated our farming practices from the years 2010 to 2019. And then after that was approved, we were able to sell the credits from 2015 to 2019. We had 22,750 credits. I wanted to check with Nori before this call, so I called them. I've sold 9,000 credits so far at $15 a piece.
9,000 credits sold so far, and those are all retroactive. It's not for what you're doing coming forward.
Right.
Okay.
Right. It has nothing to do with what we have coming forward. Shopify purchased 5,000 credits. That's what all the press release and the attention came from. The other 4,000 credits have been small purchases from different companies. When I was on the phone with Nori, they actually said that they have a large broker that would offer me $10 a credit and he would buy the rest of them. So we have to decide what we're going to do. I would hate to drop from 15 to 10, but we'll have to entertain that offer, I guess.
Okay, so the question is, you know, you always want to make money. So $10 beats $0, and you got $15 for your first credits. The thing is, when you have a conversation like I just had before this one, where a guy says that it could be anywhere from $3 to $50, then you're just thinking, well, what's the number? How do I know? And that's the problem we still have, is price discovery on carbon credits. Who set that $15 number when you got it, Kelly?
Locust told me that the credits in the United States at this time should be worth 15, and they said in Europe they were worth 45. But you know, they said that the marketplace in Europe, a lot more regulations, things like that, and that marketplace had been around a lot longer. They encouraged me to stay at 15, and they said that Nori had ensured that they wouldn't go any lower than 11. Well, now today they tell me somebody wants to offer 10, so I guess I don't know about the $11 figure, but that's how I arrived at 15. It was kind of suggested, and again, I didn't know if we'd ever get paid. You know, being the first guy, it never been done before, so we went with it. You know, we sequestered 1.15 tons, and a ton is equal to a credit. So we had 1.15 tons per acre per year. When we're selling 5 years, we had 5.75 credits, easy math. So we had about $82 an acre coming in. If we could sell them all, I guess I thought that sounded like a pretty nice figure. And, you know, overall it's about $340,000.
So the good thing
if we sell them all at 15.
So the good thing for you is it basically was you did some work to verify what kind of practices you had utilized, and you got compensated for something in your rear view mirror. That's all good. And the truth is, if you were to sell those if you sold $10 for something that's been done 5 years ago, what difference does it make? The concern would be if you locked into a moving forward contract and said, I'm locking in for $10 for 2021 through 2024, or, you know, something like that. And then it's $10 and you find out that somehow the marketplace, that guy bought them for $10 and then sold them on for 20. That'd be the concern, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
You know, we haven't sold anything ahead of time yet. Locust is actually locked in with a new market now, Blue Source. Then of course you've got Land O'Lakes has approached us. Microsoft has given Land O'Lakes $20 million, and they're paying $20 a credit now. I'm not sure how that program does go back a year or two, but that's an interesting program that farmers are trying to get signed up for now. They need to do it by the end of February, is my understanding.
So who's paying the money? Microsoft is doing it through Land O'Lakes.
Microsoft is paying Land O'Lakes to gather the credits.
Okay. And so Land O'Lakes is brought in this because obviously they have a lot of interface through their ag retail operations.
Right.
Winfield.
That's my understanding. Okay. What was that?
Winfield Solutions is a proprietary product. I don't know. I mean, they obviously are through a cooperative system. They touch a lot of farms. Most people think of Land O'Lakes that live out here in my Phoenix neighborhoods. They think of butter, but it has nothing to do with butter. But
yeah, it has a lot more to do with the amount of data that the Winfield group has. Like when it comes down to why the big ag players stick with Land O'Lakes and Winfield, it comes down to the amount of data that Winfield holds. I mean, they own more data on more acres than anyone else in the country. And so it probably has more to do with a data play than it does. That's why Microsoft would pick a company like Winfield for a partner.
Okay.
The Land O'Lakes people that called me said that Microsoft fielded offers from 198 different groups, and Land O'Lakes got it all. So he's probably right. It's probably the data that they have.
Okay.
Yeah, I worked there for 5 years, so I know the business pretty well. I mean, it's been 6 years since I've worked there, but that's the whole big thing with Winfield. It's just the volume of usable data that they've got.
All right. So Kelly was sort of the guinea pig, he says, or early adopter. And I know that some of you, you're listening to this. I think we need to open it up for questions for Kelly, our girl Jill out in Montana. What you got?
So you sold your credits to Nori, but who's to say who's keeping track that you can't go and resell those other credits to somebody else, to Land O'Lakes or something? Is there something that's governing, where you sell them, and you already sold them, so they're gone, but you could resell them and nobody would know, right? No, only
We had to use, we used our FSA data for acres. We used our crop insurance data for yield. And then we used our field view account for a GPS location. And, I can get onto my Nori marketplace and I can see which credits are from which field, from which years. And then when they're gone, I cannot re-verify them or validate them. After we compiled all the information and went through Locus, we had to deal with a third-party auditor, and the name of that company was Astor Global. That phone call came from Washington, D.C. And I don't believe it wasn't a government organization, but it was a third-party auditor that ensures that I can't sell them again.
Okay.
Okay, and then the contract was for those years past, which obviously you're never going to not be in compliance. Those years are already behind you. You've been presented with something about years moving forward, but you haven't done anything on years moving forward, right?
Locus, the reason Locus is in the carbon market is they sell a biological product named Rhizolizer Duo. I have not used it in furrow yet, but I have used it in my drip irrigation. I raised the nitrogen in my tissue samples 12%. Tissue samples are not a exact science. There is a margin for error, but a 12% move is a big move, and it's exciting and optimistic for us. So I am optimistic to try Rhizolizer. They are telling me that if I sequestered 1 ton before, I will sequester 3 to 5 tons after I use Rhizolizer. So you can see where the diverse income would come in from that. The Rhizolizer is going to cost $15 to $20 an acre. And if I sequester 2 or 3 more ton, you're talking $30 to $45 more gross income.
That's on the carbon. So that's on the carbon. Yes. But what you also
that's on the carbon.
By using their proprietary product of Rhizolizer, we don't even know how, but for somehow it helps you put more carbon in the ground. And that carbon in the ground, yes, even if you weren't getting paid on the tons, Kelly, you said it did make sense. You could justify Rhizolizer without the carbon credits just because of yield bump. Am I right?
If it does put a couple, 3 more ton of carbon in the ground, their data shows 9 to 12 bushel on corn, 3 to 5 bushel on soybeans. Well, $4 corn at 10 bushels, $40 gross, you're going to be doubling your money. Or 3 to 5 bushels soybeans, you would be doubling your money on yield just from putting carbon in the soil. 95% of raising corn is water, sunlight, and CO2, and all the other, every farmer wants to worry about the other 5%. The more carbon we can put in the soil, the more energy we're putting into the ground. I am not a left-leaning person at all. I did this for the money. Now, the fact that it helps the environment makes me feel good. I feel that farmers are cast very poorly in the media. The Washington Post as an example. I feel as a no-till farmer, we are very environmentally friendly. Are we trying to be environmentally friendly? No, we're trying to make a living. And the two things go hand in hand. That's what everybody doesn't understand. The more carbon we can put in the soil, the better off we are. I disagree with farmers that think they need to till the soil. They want to tell you it's heavy or it's black, or Mother Nature has raised things on that ground for thousands of years and they never tilled it. And the idea that we have to till it now is ridiculous to me. I think the best practices are, the best financial practice is no-till. And that's the biggest thing when it comes to this carbon market and this sequestration. The more carbon I can put in the soil, the more energy I can put in the soil, the more healthy the soil is, the more balanced the soil is, the better off we are. It really is a very simple concept that nobody's talked about for so long that they don't understand it.
So the first thing I think about when I'm hearing, and Kelly, I 100% agree with you about the financials lining up with the environmental positive impact, etc. Sorry, my trade desk here. Bruce Turkle was a guest speaker with this group here a few weeks ago, And the messaging of getting this out the right way for the farmers, I think could be huge, right? As to how you can create a win on the coasts for the farmer for the first time in 15 years, since like the first days of ethanol. I think I think that the messaging of this, if done properly, could be a gigantic windfall, and then also accelerate the rate of adoption on this, and get you back up to a bull market in the carbon trade. So the messaging, I think, is going to be as important for the farmers as it is the actual collection. So have that multi-bajillion-dollar marketing engine that kind of goes to waste at Land O'Lakes go to work on this and make sure they get the messaging right. Because if they screw that up, they may as well piss on the whole program.
Well, so far it's only been written up in two mainstream sources that I've seen: Wall Street Journal, which is how I met Kelly, and then Washington Post, which one of my investor friends kicked to me, and that's how I saw that. And of course, if you got Washington Post doing your messaging that's supposed to be on behalf of ag, we're screwed. But
right. But think about how Bruce could help formulate this message the right way. Right. So and so like what does he say? Have this message. What is it? Products that make people feel good are good products. Products that make people feel good about themselves are great products.
A good product makes people feel good. A great product makes people feel good about themselves. So yes, if we can have the East Coast and West Coast consumer feeling great about them, good about themselves because of what we're doing in ag, then it's a win for us. All right, questions for Mr. Garrett? Anybody? I got to tell you, that thing, concentration. My wife was watching the Game Show Network, and you got to look behind the squares, and all of a sudden it's like toaster and toaster, and you're always matching them up. I'm looking at my grid, and I got a bald guy in Iowa in a plaid shirt and a bald guy in the Dakotas in a plaid shirt. And I keep thinking those two, square number 3 and square number 10. And then I'm going to get a prize. So I could win a toaster if I pick Peter Schott and Kelly Garrett as bald guys in plaid.
No whammy. We're the whammies.
So anyway, has anybody got any questions or discussion for Mr. Garrett, who is so gracious to come on here and tell us about this? Martin Peterson, my banker friend in Minnesota. Would you love to see your clients, especially the ones that are treading water, get another $15 an acre or $15 a ton or whatever it could be? Do you see your bank ever trying to be somehow consultative on carbon or environmental practices, methane capture, manure digesters? Have you guys ever taken a role in this?
Yeah, I think there's going to be plenty of opportunity for banks like ours and banks everywhere to get involved with in whatever way possible on something like this. Like I said, I would tend to agree with Kelly that our bank doesn't necessarily take the left approach or the right approach. I guess we're supposed to take a neutral approach, but if it means that there's some additional funds or additional dollars coming into the cash flow for folks to be able to continue to do what they're doing and get paid to do it, if you will, from the carbon standpoint, I don't think that's going to be a problem for us here from a cash flow perspective. And really, we look at it as, some of the MFP payments and other things that happened in 2020 likely aren't going to continue to happen here into 2021, just with higher commodity prices and other things. So,
Martin, one thing, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but this has not happened locally. You're obviously at a bank, I believe Damian said. You already know the client's yields. You already know the client's acres. You already know where the fields are at. You've got the information. I don't understand why more organizations like yours don't contact an organization like Nori, become an account manager just for your customers. Think of the customer service you'll be offering, and you'll be helping those guys get that carbon. Locust doesn't want to deal with a farmer that's under 3,000 acres because they're in it for profit. Now, Land O'Lakes, I'm not sure if they have any yield, or not yield, but acre constraints or anything like that. But you already have all the information. Why doesn't your bank contact Nori, become an account manager? You might attract more clients.
No, that's a good point.
More customers.
I would tell you probably the number one reason most banks are not in it is it's one of those things that the regulations typically have to catch up with the product themselves. I would piggyback that back to even the hemp industry. We struggled, and I know hemp and carbon credits aren't necessarily the same thing, but in the game of regulations, they tend to be, because FDIC, OCC, and some of the regulators, if we start getting into something that makes them uncomfortable, then they immediately put up the red flags and say, well, what do you truly understand what you're getting into here? And then there's regulatory things that change from the bank side of things. But to your point, I don't disagree that banks like ours and others should be more involved with this. It's just whether or not the regulatory agencies are going to allow us to be involved in what capacity, at least in the short term level.
Because let's face it, most farmers want to hit the easy button. They want somebody to put the information together for them, and all they have to do is sign their name.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're right. That this would be a nice value-added service that would, all of a sudden, if you're saying, well, I can go on my phone and get my operating loan, Martin, what do you offer? You can say, well, does Tillable Finance or does Farmers Business Network or whatever the hell it is that do they do this? We're going to make sure you get your carbon credits because we're going to take your data and go and do all that. But like you said, obviously Land O'Lakes is making a play on that, to Ryan's point. Any other thoughts, questions on Kelly's thing? Can always come
Kelly,
back.
it sounded like you talked about the validation process and the auditing process being two separate processes. Maybe you could shed a little more light on that and help me understand what's the difference there.
Okay. We worked with the people at Locust, and we had to talk about our farming practices, and then we had to come up with the acres of each crop for every year. We had to come up with the yield for each crop for every year. And then we had to have like a Google pin, a location of each field so they could verify where that field was. Once we compiled all that information from Locust, it all got handed off to Aster Global. And then Aster Global had to go through there and make sure that we were telling the truth. And they are the ones that put the seal of approval on it. And then it gets handed off to Nori for the credits to be sold. And for some farmers, I think that the Aster Global phone call would be a bit tedious because he's asking a lot of questions. For me, he wanted pictures of the farm and pictures of cover crops, things like that. With the Extreme Ag website, while we were on the phone, I just had him look up the website. There's pictures of our farm and our practices all over on there. It was pretty simple. For some other people, it would probably be a little bit more of a process, but not terrible, not impossible by any stretch. The guy from Aster Global actually went to Iowa State University, where my wife and the sons go, where my wife went, my sons go. And, he's got a soils degree from there. We had a great conversation, and he just needed to be comfortable that we were telling the truth, that we could back up everything we said. You're talking about a lot of money, and they want to make sure you're being honest.
So would you advise producers that might be interested in doing this that documenting your processes is going to be critical, and maybe that's something they ought to start beefing up right away?
Yes. That we felt like we had 60 man hours in compiling that information. The one thing that, like if a person isn't no-till, their score probably isn't high enough that it might not be worth it for them to go in. The other thing is they want you to have enhanced your practices, is the term they use. If you've been no-till since 2005 and you've never done anything to change to maybe what they would say improve your conservation practices between the years of 10 and 14 or 10 and 19, you also might not qualify depending on the program you're going into, because you've already been doing those things. They're looking for producers that are trying to improve. In our case, going into the spring of 2012, we put trash wheels on our corn planter and not only no-tilled our rotated crops, but we no-tilled our corn on corn. That simple add-on there of those trash wheels is what qualified us for the program. They, your account managers like Locust, they very much want to see you get approved, and they will help you through those things. Help you come up with ideas to present and stuff like that to try to get approved. Again, ours was simple, but there, Brian, my account manager contact at Locust, they've been no-till since like the year 2000. His farm did not qualify for the Locust Nori program. Now, I don't know the exact rules on the Land O'Lakes program. Maybe that doesn't matter, but that was a concern with locust and nori.
Any other questions for Kelly? I'm ready to go to the next thing. All right, environmentalism and the climate and the carbon and all these things we're talking about from its methane ingesters. These things are coming to a field near you. Andy Ambriel, I want you to tell these people, speaking of non-crop monies that might be coming to a field near you, tell them about the meeting you had on Friday.
Well, it was kind of interesting. We had an offer for someone to put solar farm on basically everything we own and majority of what we rent. So we kind of just got through the power line project. There was, I don't know how many miles of 760 kilovolt or whatever power lines put in near us a couple years ago, new substation and all that. And it ends up that's a good place to hook in a solar farm as well. So we're extremely early in that process. And it seems like it's not a crop add-on. It's a basically farm goes in a whole different direction type thing. So it's a lot to digest. And like I said, we're still very, very early in that process. So.
By the way, Jim wants to know, who'd you talk to? Who was the company that talked to you about developing the solar farm?
I forget the exact name. There's been a couple different people. One person's with some land scouting company, and then the other is the actual developer. I don't remember off the top of my head the names of those companies.
Leeward?
What's that?
Leeward Renewable Energy?
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Was one of them. Yeah.
Okay, so the point is, we're talking
like I
about
said,
mineral rights. We talk about, getting paid to sequester carbon. You're still doing your thing, but when you put solar panels out there, it changes the dynamic of everything. But why is this going to happen? Tell them the money.
Well, I mean, if I was an absentee landowner, I'd jump on it as fast as I could. They're offering basically 2 to almost 3 times what the going cash rental rate is. So it's one of those things. If I was just renting out my farm and lived 100 miles away, it's a no-brainer financial decision. Whether we want to live amongst that and completely change the entire structure of the farm, that's a little bit larger decision. So,
of course, you can take that money and go down the road and do something else. My bigger question is, why are they building? So why do they want solar panels in a part of the country that only gets sun about 100 days a year? There's a reason I came down here and bought a house in Arizona. It's because there's no sunshine for 6 months, but I don't understand that.
Yep. A lot of the cost structure has to do with where they can tie into the grid and how close they are to, large populations. And also the guy explained that Indiana over the next couple years has 4 major power plants shutting down that were coal-fired because of the increased cost of regulations and all that. They're scheduled to shut down. So there's going to have to be something done to replace the needs of all those. And right now, the way the economics work, he said that solar, if you're going to build something from the ground up, solar is the most competitive right now. So there was a 2-year extension on the tax credits as part of the coronavirus bill for solar and not wind. Wind and solar had both been included, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, and that has pretty much ran out, but they did do a 2-year extension on solar. So that's another reason why there's a big push right now to get as many of these started as possible. So
I just think it's remarkable, because if I was approached about it, I mean, I'm a farm guy, but economics are economics. The numbers they're talking about are 3 to 4 times what I could cash rent my ground for. So if I can get 3 times what I'm getting right now from my operator, I would take the money, because it's business. So that's what I find remarkable, that it's essentially, it works because of tax credits, but for them. So, all right. Anybody got questions about solar? Or we're going to move on to our next person. All right.
Hey, Damian. So on those solar credits, or the solar payback, is that going to go up over time, or is that just kind of a locked in number for a 30-year period, or how does that work?
When I sat in on a session 2 years ago, I was a guest speaker for the Illinois Farm and Real Estate Appraisal Management Association. I sat in on a solar expert talking about it. They are escalators built in, similar to if you had a strip mall or a commercial doctor's office where you built in escalators. Andy, what did they tell you on your escalator bumps?
They had a 2% per year built in. I asked them about tying it to an inflation index, and they would not do that. He said for their financing, it had to be a fixed rate. I'm also exploring some type of a revenue share. So, similar to like a 50-50 farm rental agreement or something like that, where the payments would be based on the price of what they can contract electricity for. So there's a couple options out there, but there was the 2% escalator.
They dangle a huge number out there at you, Doug. I mean, when I'm sitting there in that Illinois meeting 2 years ago, and they said we're leasing ground for $800 an acre, and I'm sitting there getting whatever $240 or something, and I'm like, why the hell are they? It seems like they're almost irresponsibly overpaying for it, but then they only build in a 2% bump. But wasn't there a chance that there's not a renegotiate at 10 or 15 years? No,
it's a 30-year contract, and then they have 2 10-year extensions. So in essence, it could be a 50-year contract before you can renegotiate anything. So you got to think, in 50 years, is $800 an acre or whatever, is that going to be good enough? It's hard to say. So, there's some ground that 50 years ago you could have about bought for what you're getting in cash rent today. So it's hard to say.
Yep. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, Peter, I now know which square is you because Kelly took off. Peter's going to tell us about, wait, before Peter, I'm sorry, sticking on the whole thing about environmental and how this affects us, we might as well stay in that same thread. Climate change. If you're in Texas, as Todd and Jordan both are, your climate has just changed remarkably in the last week. Jordan, tell us your territory that you cover specifically, and then what now the expectation is. Does this weather screw you up? Does it cause any of your people to go broke? Or your product mix is going to change? Tell us where your territory is and what the outlook is now that you've had this crazy weather.
Yeah, so I cover East Texas, which basically covers down to Victoria, up to Wichita Falls, over to Louisiana. So basically 35 East is what I cover. And the biggest part of my territory that it's going to affect is going to be the upper Gulf Coast portion. So what will happen there is there could be a shift in acres, most likely is what we're going to see. There's already corn in the ground right now. Some of it's out of the ground, and I'm assuming they're going to have to replant that. And then some of it is not out of the ground yet. So they're definitely going to have to replant that. What could happen is we basically have a month left to plant corn. If we aren't planted by March 15th down here in the upper Gulf Coast, at least, we have to switch acres. So if we get a rain event in the latter part of February, which is according to the weather right now, it's supposed to rain the last week of February into the first week of March. So if that sticks around and it's too wet, we're going to bump up close to that window of opportunity to plant corn. So we're probably going to see a lot of corn acres shift to cotton. It's a lot easier of a decision to make this year because of where cotton prices are, obviously, helped a lot. So as long as those can stay there, guys won't be too worried about it. We'll also probably see some shift to sorghum because of what's going on here as well. As far as the rest of the state of Texas goes and the rest of like some of my counterparts, we were talking on the phone earlier with some of them, and they had said, the veggie market's pretty much shot. So the veggie market down in the valley, they're pretty much going to call that a loss and take insurance on that. And that will be it for the season. They won't grow anything else there either on that ground, and they won't switch to anything. Big concern right now with the loss of citrus trees in the valley too. If if it gets bad enough, they could lose trees, and obviously we'd have to put those back into production and plant different trees there. And then as far as West Texas and kind of like the Panhandle goes, this is actually going to benefit those guys over there. It's putting a lot more soil or a lot more moisture into the soil profile. So as far as corn acres go, there will probably be a tick up there just because there's more soil or there's more moisture in the ground now. So they don't have to plant over there until they're more of like the Midwest timeline. So this will really just help them.
What about your product mix? You got a lot of stuff pre-sold because your season starts in February down there, and now you've been paid for it. So now you're just going to actually sell more product.
It'll be interesting from a product standpoint. If they switch to cotton, yeah, that would help me. As far as like burn down and stuff goes right now, you've got some products out there where they aren't going to be able to switch from corn or cotton to sorghum. So that'll be interesting to see how that works. Some guys too are concerned, obviously down here in the Upper Gulf Coast, basically all of my territory, we don't have heated warehouses. So the loss of product is something that we're concerned about right now too, as far as if certain products freeze at a certain temperature, and we've hit that temperature for 5 days in a row now, I think we might kind of be screwed on that front more so.
Like a jug of herbicide or a jug of insecticide that can't get below 34 degrees or something?
Correct. Because none of our warehouses are heated for them to kind of, prevent that. So
I was kind of hoping that the weather event was going to make it so you basically sold 2 products into every acre just because of weather. And then you all of a sudden people think you're a sales genius and it's just because you copy the weather. And all of a sudden Corteva gives you a promotion just based on it snowed in Texas. That's kind of what I was hoping for you, Jordan.
Probably not, but we will cross our fingers that more acres shift to cotton, and then that could help.
Remember, in farming, we always say, you like it when another part of the country gets bad weather because then you get good weather and it boosts your crops. You know what? You just need to hope that you keep getting bad weather in your territory right when they still need to use crop inputs. I mean, it's man eat man. It's every, what is it? Dog eat dog, rat world, or what do they call it? Rat race.
Mm-hmm.
All right. See, go to these more seasoned veterans like my girl Bobby, and she knows about the sales game, and she's got a couple more years of experience than you. So she knows, hey, all's fair, right, Bobby? All's fair out here, right? You don't care why they have to buy. You just want to sell the crap.
Solving problems, I think, is the is the goal. And our customers in Texas are struggling something fierce with those weather changes in calf health. So
yeah. When you get these kind of weather swings, we got more pneumonia, more calving, more all kinds of calf hood problems. Yeah. Peter is going to now talk about why we should all invest in Bitcoin. I think something like that. I don't know. I don't fully understand it. Peter,
I wouldn't buy Bitcoin. I'd buy Dogecoin right now if you're just into shits and giggles, which is up 1,800% from the beginning of the year. But
they taught me once. It taught me once. Don't ever buy when something's up 1,800%. I think that's when we're supposed to be selling when something's up 1,800%. But I'm just a comedian with an ag econ degree. What do I know? Peter,
blockchain and cryptocurrency are 2 different things. But when people say blockchain, a lot of times they think crypto and they think Bitcoin. And why didn't I buy that stuff years ago? Or maybe I lost a USB stick that's worth $30 million now because I lost it. But we're doing a conference on blockchain and agriculture, and it's for people that there's a lot of people talking about blockchain. Cargill as a platform. What do they call it now? Is it Splinter that they build out. Nori, that's come up a couple times on the call today. They're doing a crypto thing to do the tracking the carbon credit piece of it right now. There's been projects before where groups like IBM have done things to trace pork supplies in China with blockchain. And now blockchain it's a ledger that keeps track of when something goes from one person's hands to another. And so that ledger is being used in a lot of different ways along supply chains or things. Some people think it's the best thing since sliced bread. Other people think it's a solution looking for a problem to solve. And we're going to have all those people on our conference on the 26th. It's from 8:30 to about 11 o'clock Central in the morning. It's free. We're just trying to get people that are skeptics and champions alike just to have a conversation about it and maybe learn something. So
real quickly, two things. Yes, his company, your company, is having a seminar about this. It don't cost nothing. You're not selling anything. It's more of a let's explain this stuff. And you're going to send the link to that to people on the Business of Ag.
Yeah, I can send it to the people on the call. Yeah.
Okay. And it's what day again? Feb 26th.
26. Yep.
Okay, so Friday of next week in the afternoon.
In the morning, 8:30 a.m.
All right, Central.
Yep.
Okay. So he's going to send that link and then explain again, what is blockchain and what topics, what things are you going to hit on your conference call about that?
So if you think about your business, your cash is what you spend the money, and blockchain is like your QuickBooks or your accounting thing behind the scenes that keeps track of where the money's going. Blockchain is the ledger that tracks when something goes from one person to the next, is what blockchain is. And there's a whole bunch of computers and things around the world that all kind of keep track of this stuff. And so if you try to break it in one spot, there's going to be 5,000 other places that say, no, that's not what happened. So there's a lot of cross-checking. So you can't go in there and fix something to say, well, no, it didn't go this way, because of all that verification. So that's what blockchain technology is from what I understand it. And there's a lot of different ways people are trying to use that to solve problems with data going from one source to the next. So if you've got, a farmer giving grain to a elevator, giving them to a shipper, or whatever it may be, they're starting to use blockchain to trace that stuff as it goes from one place to the next. You also hear a lot of things about smart contracts too, where people are starting to trace contract parameters and things on a blockchain as well, to have that there as well. So yeah, we're gonna have different people from the industry. Some people that don't know a thing about blockchain and just have problems to solve. Some people that are really technical into it, and other people in the middle along the way. They're just having conversations about what is blockchain and what are some problems that are looking to be solved and how might this work together.
Cool. Just out of curiosity, why has your company decided to have this webinar, seminar, conference call?
Because we deal with supply chain stuff, mainly on the export side for soybeans and soybean meal. And I want to look at opportunities for what are ways that we can kind of bring from the farmer producing the soybeans to the animal producer over in Southeast Asia that's actually using and consuming it. What are opportunities to bring transparency in there? Because the farmers are getting screwed right now on the trades with soybeans and soybean meal on price protein, where they're using it for energy and metabolizable energy and amino acids. Crushers are taking some of that volume. There's bits of the value that are underappreciated. And the more we can make the industry aware of that, the more that they can come back to the farmers like my dad and brother here that are growing soybeans. So just looking at different technologies. I'm a cautious, optimistic skeptic. And so I just want to see what's going on with blockchain, and then let's get people together to see how we can maybe do more with it.
Do you have an expert on it, or are you acting as expert on it?
We have a whole bunch of experts. I'm not an expert on it. I'm trying to learn more about it myself. So
that's what we're all saying. Anybody? All right, Jonathan Arbach. I want to make sure I'm saying it right. Jonathan, it's Arbach or Arbach? Unmute.
Arbach.
Arbach. You're a new member. You work in the Dakotas. The guy that just talked is in the Dakotas. I know there's two different Dakotas, but I can't remember. He's in South, I think. He might be in North. Anyway, he's in one of those two very big states that's colder than hell all the time that I normally have to travel to in the winter, but not this year. Where are you, Jonathan, real quickly, and what's your deal?
Aberdeen, South Dakota. Seed salesman. Latham's, hybrids, and Beck's seed.
Got it. We've got seed people on here. The dude that was on that asked the question about the solar panels, that's Doug Hubner. He is the brand manager for Hubner Seeds, and he also is a contract producer through Hubner Farms in West Central Indiana to the seed companies. And then Troy Clausen is a seed person. He's with DeKalb, and he's usually on here, but he's not today. So you'll get some of that. John then asked when he joined if we ever had done a session on sales. So if it's okay with you, Todd and Michelle have data about what they're seeing in the ag sales profession. And next week, what we're thinking about doing is, 2 weeks from now, on March 3rd, when we meet again, making it all about sales from the standpoint of what sales is, what we're seeing in the business of ag sales, some trends that are happening, some problems that Todd is seeing with his clients and consultants. Would a session on the whole sales thing, would it work? Would that be something you guys would be interested in for 2 weeks from now? Yeah, everybody's all with that. We'll let Bobby.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Damian,
Dory.
I would be interested, but March 3rd, I can't be here. So could you move it?
Well, then you know what? We're not going to change it just because of you. You're going to have to just actually log on and listen to it. So
Oh, yeah, that's right. You record these when you remember
you
to.
record them. Also, I was thinking Hubner and Bobby in particular, since they hire salespeople, would be interested in what data and information Todd has to share. And then anybody else that's got anything on this, kind of help us and we can create the outline.
Yeah, for sure. If you've got any specific things you want to talk about, let us know so we can kind of make sure that we address those issues that you want to address. You know, my big angle is going to be how we structure sales teams moving forward and how we make sure salespeople get fairly compensated for what they contribute to the business. And so there's a lot of moving parts there, but we've got some interesting connections with some companies that are doing some creative things, and I think there's some real interesting concepts to discuss there. But whatever sales related issues you want to address, please let us know, and we'll try to customize it for you.
Yeah, I was thinking I would kind of do an overview of what I've seen in sales and some of the things that I see that are still that mystify me when I've worked with sales groups. I've been hired to train some salespeople with smaller ag organizations. So that's kind of the thing I'm going to bring. So he's going to bring what's happening in the industry with some of his consultant clients, and Michelle has some information on that as well, breaking down some numbers. And I was going to give you some of the things that I see and some of the problems, and then how I think organizations are actually not maximizing their sales force. So that was kind of the angle. And then anybody wants to be a guest, maybe Bobby and Doug, and since I mentioned you both, since you are actively sales managers hiring salespeople, I think that you guys want to kick in. Anybody else that wants to kick in for a sort of a report or an update, that'd be a fun thing for 2 weeks from now. Hey, by the way, Jonathan, not only do I want to welcome you for being here, but you know what? Next time, put the light in front of your face instead of behind you. You're still a little dark and shadowy. I want to be able to see your emotion. I want to see you like that look of eureka when we say something intelligent. Like when Jim Smith tells you about his lamb operation, I want you to go, and be like, oh my God, I've never heard such brilliance in my entire life. All right, we're ready for the lightning round. And so there's only two of us. So if a third one wants to kick in and do a 1 to 2 minute lightning round of a life and business nugget that anybody can benefit from, Todd's going to go, then I'm going to go, unless somebody wants to kick in for the Michelle spot. Todd, go.
So I've been thinking a lot lately about risk. And I think from a business perspective, we need to start thinking about risk in a more sophisticated manner. And it just keeps popping up over and over again. We're down here in Texas, and there's been a lot of discussion. Of course, this whole thing has been politicized, and the conservatives are saying, well, it's because we depended too much on windmills that froze up, and it's the more folks on the liberal side are saying, no, it's the fact that you didn't invest in infrastructure and you don't have high enough tax rates and all that kind of stuff. The reality is it's a combination of all those things. And really what this issue is breaks down into a matter of risk. What we're dealing with down here in Texas is the reality that what happened this week happens about once every 100 years. Okay. Are we really going to build infrastructure around an event that happens every 100 years? You know, probably not. But when it does happen, it's going to piss a lot of people off. You know, you look at COVID, and we talk about the supply chains, and I've mentioned on there before that we have to be a little cognizant about the fact that what we're discussing here doesn't happen often. Now, if we want to have a conversation about whether or not these kinds of things are going to happen more often in the future, I'm certainly open to that. But are we really going to completely adjust an extremely efficient supply chain in order to address something that might only happen once every 100 years? So this is really all about risk, and there's a natural tendency, human tendency, to view risk in a very distorted manner. And so I think we need to be thinking about it from a business standpoint, trying to come up with a more sophisticated way of looking at this and understanding that if there's a 4% chance that this is going to happen, that in reality, that's a range. In any given year, you have a range of chances that that's going to happen. And we need to understand what are the impacts, right? So risk is really a balancing act. And so we need to make sure that we have more sophisticated ways to understand the potential impacts and what that might cost us. And so, you know, another example before I turn it over to Damian is, you know, we talk about from a public policy standpoint, we talk about COVID. And early on in COVID, there was a bunch of politicians that were coming out and say, well, if we can just save one life, you know, this will all be worth it. And I say bullshit, you know, nobody really believes that. Nobody believes that we're going to shut down the entire American economy to save one life. I don't care who it is. You know, so we really need to start thinking about risk differently, and really all of these issues. Whether you're negotiating a contract, whether you're trying to make a decision about whether to hire somebody and bring them onto your team, no matter what it is, at the end of the day, it's all a risk calculation. And I think we just do a really poor job in general, in business in general, and specifically in agriculture, which is ironic because we're in one of the most risk prone industries in the world. I think we still have really simplistic ways of looking at risk. And I think we need to really work on that.
I love it. And I was going to do a different topic, and I still might end up giving you two lightning rounds, because I didn't even know for sure where Todd was going to go with that, but I'm going to give you it this way. This is something that we can all learn from. He just talked about, and it's basically in its simplicity, we're going to carry on about what happened in Texas and toss the blame and all that. But on a daily arrangement, is that really what your big risk is? Is your real risk this 100-year event? Brings me back to my mom, who was a difficult person and also a bad business person. She, when I started taking care of some of her stuff, she's been dead now for a while, but I said, Mom, why do you have a $5,000 life insurance policy? She says, well, my God, I might die. I said, you're going to die, but why are you spending several $100s a year for something that has such a low return? But to her, she does what a lot of humans do. They focus on this one little thing. They just focus on this one little thing. And it's not even what your big risk is or your big problem is, nor is it where your biggest outcome will come from. You see this happen with micromanagers in business, where they just can't get off this one little thing, or, you know, bugging their one sales rep over this minuscule thing instead of looking at the big picture. So it's, in other words, it's really a matter of scale that Todd's talking about. I saw it with my mom. I see it with a lot of businesses I work with. They just focus, almost obsess over this one little goddamn thing. You're like, is this really where you're vulnerable? Is this really where the problem is? Mom, if you die, you have 130 acres that is paid for with a house. You have an Oldsmobile. I could sell your Oldsmobile and pay for your funeral versus this $5,000 life insurance policy. Are you applying your concern or your obsession where there's actually the risk and the reward from it? Why don't you instead focus on what you can do instead of that? So I think that Todd's thing is really neat. Anybody else got one? Well, then I'm going to have to give you my other one that I planned. It's the month of love, the month of February. And so I don't normally get touchy-feely like Todd does. Remember, he talked to us once about his massages. They talked about keeping a ledger. They talked about like going out and walking around barefoot in the grass and becoming one with nature. He frankly became our little beatnik. And I thought, good Lord, man, what's next? So I'm going to get a little bit sentimental here. I'm going to talk about love, the month of love, as it were. Older people, for sure, maybe even down to Jordan's age, have heard this thing. If you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And I think I speak for everybody on this call, certainly those of us that run our own business. That is complete and utter bullshit. If you love what you do, it means that you're kind of excited about it. You have some creativity. It means you have some really good days. It's just kind of like a relationship. You have days where it's just like to the moon. And you have other days you're like, why in the hell am I with this person? That's what running your own business, even when you love it, is like. So this idea that you're going to never work a day in your life if you love what you do is nonsense, because work is work. So the one thing that 27 years has taught me, I love it when people say, if you love what you do, and Damian, you probably love what you do. And they'll say, well, you love being creative. You probably love being on stage. I said, I do sometimes. Sometimes I hate my audience. Sometimes I hate the person that's hired me. Sometimes I hate being where I am. The reality is work is work. Save your love for your relationships. Love yourself. Love your work ethic. Love your partner. Love your dogs. Like what you do, and realize that you've also got to be able to put it in perspective, because work is work. That's my lightning round for you. Anybody else? All right. Extreme Ag, beginning with the letter X, not with the letter E. Extremeag.farm is how you can find Kelly Garrett. He texted me. He had to jump because he's got weather problems in Iowa and he's got 400 cow-calf pairs and he needed to go out and do some cattle handling. But do check him out. And if you appreciate him being here, send him a little email. He'd really probably like that. February 26th in the morning, Peter Schott's going to do a blockchain seminar that we can all learn from. I don't know that I'm in town that day or not. And then on March 3rd, the next time we meet, we're going to talk about sales and we're going to give a whole bunch of different background on what Todd and Michelle particularly see, and a little bit from me on what we see in sales and ag as problems and also opportunities. Todd, anything?
That's it.
All right. As usual, thanks for being here on the Business of Ag Success Group. Appreciate it.